Shavua Tov, Chag Sameach. We are very, very excited to be with you this Passover. I'm Rabbi Wendy Geffen, joined by my colleagues and friends, Cantor David Goldstein. This is in my Zoom boxes. Cantor David Goldstein, Rabbi Ryan Daniels, Rabbi Lisa Green. And we are really excited to be with you, whether you are watching this in real time or whether you are watching this on demand, as it were, these new features that we never imagined would be part of our Passover Seder, but really have become that way. We are excited to connect with you as we do every year in bringing to life the story of our ancestors, which, as we know, is the story of us too, in every age, in every generation. You can follow along just with us here. We have everything you need contained in our screens. So if you do not have a Haggadah, if you do not have a Seder plate in front of you, it's okay. We have it all. If you want to bring your own Haggadah and kind of follow along with us, we encourage you to. You're welcome to. You're certainly, we would love it if you take up your own Seder plate, your own matzah, but feel no obligation because we are bringing you with us this night as we bring in Pesach. It is really powerful to think that we have been together. And in many respects, we pray we are bookending this experience of a pandemic with Passover. We began the reality that we have lived in over the past year, right around the same time that Pesach began last year. And I don't know about you, but for me, I've been thinking a lot about the differences between then and now, and what it was like to look into a Passover, knowing we were walking into constriction, walking into what felt like Mitzrayim, a real place of fear, a real place of scarcity. And I know that I've never had a Passover like that, and I hope to never have a Passover like that again. But it did invite me into a consciousness of experience that did make me feel connected to a part of our story. And I hope that this year, we will all be able to connect to a different part of our story deeply and personally too. Because this year, unlike last year, we are walking into what we hope is openness, expansiveness, possibility, hope, healing, walking towards, not away from, the promised land. And even just thinking about it that way, honestly, takes me into a place of deep awe. And for all of those who are sitting at our own tables, who are connecting with others sitting at their own tables, perhaps some of you are even sitting with others at your table this year because perhaps you have been lucky enough to be vaccinated. What a miracle. And of course, we carry with us all of those who are not here, all of those we've lost along the way, and in particular over this past year. And as always is the case with Passover, we mix the bitter with the sweet. We mix our sadness with our joy, all of the contrasts, which are not just the reserve of a time of pandemic, but which are the truth of our lives all the time. Passover might happen once a year, but it's a microcosm for what happens to us every day, if only we are to key into it. So just some opening words of reflection. This piece written by Rabbi David Marcus for opening the Passover of this year of pandemic. Long ago at this season, the journey toward freedom began. After darkness and death, liberation's light shined through our doorways. Under the first full moon of spring, our ancestors walked out of the house of bondage. Under a desert sky full of stars, they dared to look up, infinite potential at last. Into the future they pushed, destination unsure, led forward by promises they barely believed. The end of suffering and fear, the holiness of equal dignity, the human right to be free. On this Passover night, we renew history's call to keep these promises for us and for all. This sacred night rouses us to release the bound, both here and everywhere. Exactly 1 year ago tonight, the same first full moon of spring rose over a world transformed. Plagues swept through the land, darkness and death returned. Bondage took new forms, global lockdowns, quarantines, and digital goodbyes. Bondage took old forms, stubbornly strong, cruelty and lies that enslave. With tonight's first full moon of spring, we yearn again for a just and righteous freedom. And like our ancestors before us, we feel weary and worn, unready and unsure. This Passover mixes grief and joy, and our ancestors have been here before. They turned mourning into dancing. They turned bitterness into resilience. With our ancestors at our backs and eternal promise before us, let us open to Passover's light. May the full moon of freedom shine on us and all who are bound and all the world. So we turn to light as we begin every festival, every holiday with the lighting of our candles. So if you have candles with you at home, we invite you to get ready, take them out, get a match, a lighter, whatever you have. You can light your candles. We'll join together in the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel yom tov. And as we mark this festival, as we do always, but really especially this year where Passover is new in so many ways, we'll join together in Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. You give us life. You sustain us. You have enabled us to reach this day. Amen.
Amen.
Every Seder has a very specified order. It's because the word Seder actually means order. And so we turn to the traditional melody and song that reminds us of this order. Cantor Goldstein, take it away.
Kadesh urchatz, karpas yachatz, magid rachza, motzi matzah, maror korech, shulchan orech, tzafun barech, Hallel nirtzah. And so we begin we begin with Kadesh, the first part of the order, and the way we do that is by raising our first cup of wine for the Kiddush. I have my frog. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Every Seder offers us the opportunity to wash our hands not once, but twice. In our Seder this evening, we will combine the two into one for the purposes of our internet Seder. But you certainly can turn to the traditional first and second times. The first one happening now before Karpas, and the second one happening before Motzi Matzah Maror, that section toward the end. Of course, this idea of washing our hands, takes on such new, deep meaning for us now, a year into what has likely been, I think, unless you're in the medical field, probably the most hand washing you have ever done. Or maybe it's just me, I don't know. But I know for me, the whole idea of hand washing has taken on different meaning, sacred meaning. It's not just about cleanliness. I actually like to think of it in the construct that our ancestors did, the rabbis did around the first traditional hand washing, which wasn't a commandment for the purposes of sanitation. Instead, it had to do with purity. And in our Jewish construct, purity isn't about cleanliness, it's about holiness. And what might it feel like for us if when we wash our hands, we think not only about the utilitarian purpose of that, but also the idea that when we wash our hands, we are engaging in something that is transformative for how we understand the relationship we have with ourselves, transformative in how we understand the relationship with everything else we might touch after. Think of everything your hands have done over this last year, not just the washing, not just the typing, not just the holding, but the offering. Perhaps you brought groceries or flowers or something you baked to a friend. Perhaps you baked challah for the first time, and now perhaps you bake it all the time and you've kneaded things. Perhaps your hands have literally saved lives this year. There are some who are joining us whose hands literally make it possible to vaccinate others. Aren't these things incredible? And so we invite you to think about that for a moment. And you can join us in the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al nitilat yadayim. So bear with me, friends. I'm going to try to do this in not at my kitchen sink. You can go to your kitchen sink if you'd like. Traditionally, you do this 2 times, right to left. Now that I've sprayed water all over my Haggadah. So my hands are clean, they are pure, and we move to Karpas, the tradition of what you likely understand is eating parsley at the Seder, the green vegetable. In a lot of ways, I'll let you in on a little secret. This was the genius of the rabbis of putting Karpas at the beginning. It kind of means appetizers. So you can start to eat anything that like grows from the earth in a pure form once the Karpas ritual happens through the rest of the Seder until we get to Motzi Matzah Maror. So the good news is once we partake of this, you can begin to snack a bit. Karpas, of course, is categorized as any sort of vegetable that grows from the earth. And so it's actually not the case that you have to have parsley. My karpas plate, I don't know if you can see it. I have celery, parsley, cilantro, which I know is controversial, but if you're from Texas, you probably like it. And I even have broccoli. So for anyone who knows me, this would be my karpas of preference. I'm going to use it today. So we take up a vegetable from the earth because Pesach marks the beginning of a new year, a new season, the springtime, growth, rebirth. And we take up that product. And of course, we dip it in salt water to remind us, as everything else does, that along with the sweetness, along with the promise, still comes bitterness, still comes the tears of our ancestors, still comes our own sadness. We blend those together as we partake. So if you can take up your karpas and have your salt water ready. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri ha'adamah. And so we arrive at the introduction of the matzah. Yachatz, the breaking of the middle matzah. I have on my matzah plate, if you can see it, 3 matzot. I'll take the middle matzah and break it to mark this ritual of yachatz, of breaking. And I'm going to place one back into my stack of matzah. I'll wrap the other one in a napkin and hide it to be our afikomen. There's something interesting about yachatz and worth us considering, that, of course, often this ritual is meant to remind us of the brokenness that exists in our world, everything that's sort of torn apart. But this year especially, I'm thinking of this a little bit differently. At the heart of yachatz is the idea of breaking bread together. And for me, it's a little bit of a prayer this year in and of itself, that as we break this matzah for yachatz, that for those of us who are not yet together with all of those we would want to be, perhaps over the course of this year, that might become real again for us. I know it's something I've missed so much this year, the ability to break bread with the people I care about, beyond just those who live in my home. And it's a prayer that I extend for all of you too, that come next year's Seder, perhaps we will really all be breaking the same bread together. So we turn to halach ma'anya, this reminder really of what the matzah is. It isn't a challah, it isn't a loaf of bread, it's matzah. The lechem oni, as we'd understand it, the poor person's bread. Isn't it interesting that our tradition understood that to really be grateful for and appreciate our freedom, we mark that with the lechem oni, not something that's indulgent, but something that is as basic as it could be. Halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction. Here is the bread our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is hungry, come in and eat. Anyone who is in need, come and find a place at our Pesach table. Now we are here, next year in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year, may we all be free.
And we are continuing to tell the story. Our Haggadah goes mignut l'shevach, from degradation to dignity, from the depths of slavery to the joy of redemption. And we know that the Haggadah is all about asking questions and answering those questions. We read in Torah multiple occasions, "V'haggadah telebincha," and you shall tell your child. You should tell your child when they ask. And so we are told to ask questions. And from the earliest iteration of the Seder, before there was an official Haggadah, we know that there were questions asked, different questions than our questions today. But we turn to those traditional 4 questions, which for many of us are read or sung by the youngest person in the house, but that is not Jewish law. There are different customs. Some families, I think, like to go to the oldest. There are many ways to do that. You can also, over dinner, whether you're at the table with people or over Zoom or FaceTime, ask people other questions that they have about Seder. If you don't have all the answers, it's okay. I, of course, was humbled years ago when my very brilliant and then very young cousin, I think he was about 4 then, now he has a PhD and is in his late 20s. I asked everyone at the Seder what their questions were, and my young cousin Ryan, no relation to Rabbi Daniels, but another great name, turned and said, "Lisa, why are there place cards at the table?" I said, well, it is a question about how the Seder table is different, so who knows what questions will come up. So we turn to the 4 questions, and I invite you to sing with me, or if you want to read with me, at another moment, sing them as well with your family as well. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, mikol halelot, shebechol halelot, anu ochlin chametz umatzah, chametz umatzah, halayla hazeh kulo matzah, halayla hazeh kulo matzah, shebechol halelot anu ochlin she'ar yirakot, she'ar yirakot, halayla hazeh maror, maror, halayla hazeh maror, maror, shebechol halelot in anu matpilin afilu pa'am echad, afilu pa'am echad, halayla hazeh shetei ve'amim, halayla hazeh shetei ve'amim, shebechol halelot anu ochlin pen yoshvinu vein misubin, pen yoshvinu vein misubin, halayla hazeh kulanu misubin, halayla hazeh kulanu misubin. Those questions ask, why is this night so unlike other nights, unique in so many ways? Indeed, this is the second year that that question has had deepened meaning as we are together apart. The questions continue. On all other nights, the bread that we eat is chametz and matzah. On this night, we only eat matzah. While on all other nights, the plants that we eat are many and diverse. On this matzah, why do we taste a bitter herb? Maror. While on all other nights, we never dipped herbs, we dip not even once. On this Pesach night, our custom is to dip twice. While on all other nights, we eat sitting up or reclining as we dine. On this Pesach night, each one of us reclines. Among the questions that speak to differentiating where we are as we begin our Pesach holiday together. As we tell the story, we recall our slavery in Egypt, Avadim Hayinu. We turn to Cantor Goldstein.
Avadim hayinu, hayinu, ata b'nei chorin, b'nei chorin, avadim hayinu, ata b'nei chorin, avadim hayinu, ata b'nei chorin, b'nei chorin.
We know that the number 4 is a big number in the Passover Seder. We've just chanted the 4 questions. We turn to the 4 children. Traditionally, the 4 sons. In some Seders, turn to the 4 daughters. We'll look at the 4 children, however they identify. We read in the Haggadah that explains 4 times the Torah tells us, teach your children about the Exodus from Egypt. 4 times we are reminded, and you shall tell your child on that day, from this, the sages infer that there are 4 kinds of people. And so at our Seder, we speak of sons and daughters who are wise, and those who question our rituals and traditions, sons and daughters who are simple, and those who do not know how to ask. And we are taught, respond to them in different ways, according to their questions, their situations, their needs. Indeed, we can look to 4 different children at our Seder table, or we can look to each of us as having a bit of each child in us, maybe all at this moment, maybe at different times in our lives. And we consider who we are and how we want to learn, how we want to ask questions. How are we, all 4? We have a unique opportunity to tell the story. Haggadah is, of course, a telling, and Magid, the telling of the story, is the key part of the Seder, which we do in so many ways, through our symbols, through our questions, our answers, our songs. And this year we have it through a video. You might have may recall a different video we did at Purim, but a video we have at Passover to tell the story in yet another unique way.
A long time ago, the Israelite people were enslaved in Egypt. In Hebrew, Egypt is Mitzrayim, which means a narrow place. But in order to understand how we got there, we have to go way, way back in time. A long, long time ago, there was a famine in the land of Israel. Nobody had anything to eat. To keep his family safe, Jacob moved them all to the only place they knew had food, Mitzrayim, or Egypt. Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, was already there. He had become prime minister of Egypt, assisting a kind-hearted pharaoh, ensuring that people had enough to eat. Over time and over many generations, Jacob's family grew. They soon became a great, mighty, and prosperous nation, and because of this, became a threat to a new pharaoh, one who did not know Jacob and Joseph and all the wonderful things they had done for Egypt. Out of fear towards these Israelites, Pharaoh enslaved them. He made them do hard work in the hot desert sun, commanding them to bake bricks out of mud and straw and to build cities like Pitom and Ramses. In their anguish, the Israelites cried out to Adonai, the God of their ancestors. God heard their voice and saw their suffering. Moses, having fled from Egypt, after defending the Hebrew slaves, was a shepherd in Midian. God called to him from the midst of a burning bush. God directed Moses to go to Pharaoh and tell him, "Let my people go." Pharaoh was not eager to free his slaves. When Moses came to talk to Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, "No." To convince them to free the Israelites, God brought 10 plagues to afflict Pharaoh and his people. Dam, blood. Tzfardea, frogs. Kinim, lice. Arov, swarms of beasts. Dever, cattle disease. Shechin, boils. Barad, hail. Arbe, locusts. Choshech, darkness. With each plague, Pharaoh grew more and more stubborn. Every time Moses asked Pharaoh to let the people go, Pharaoh said no. After the 9th plague, the plague of darkness, the Israelites were told to prepare for what was to come. Every family was to take a lamb and make a special sacrifice to God. They then put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of their homes as a sign that Israelite slaves lived in those homes. The 10th plague was Makat Bechorot, striking down the firstborn sons of Mitzrayim. The Israelites were spared because of the blood on their homes. The angel of death passed over the marked houses. After this 10th plague, the grieving Pharaoh relented and agreed to let the Israelites go. They were in a hurry. They knew Pharaoh could change his mind at any moment. They didn't even wait long enough for their bread dough to rise. They quickly gathered their food and belongings and left Mitzrayim as fast as they could. Sure enough, Pharaoh did change his mind. His army chased the Israelites into the sea, and just as the last Israelite stepped out onto dry land, the waves of the sea crashed down on Pharaoh and all of his men. The Israelites were saved. They rejoiced with singing and dancing, even as God grieved the loss of life of the Egyptians, who were also God's children. We remember these events today with the holiday of Passover, beginning with the Seder, a special meal that includes elements such as drinking 4 cups of wine or juice, asking 4 questions, reading about and discussing the story of the Exodus from a book called a Haggadah, eating foods filled with meaning like unleavened bread called matzah and bitter herbs called maror, and through it all, trying to imagine what it would have been like to be a slave to Pharaoh in Egypt. We continue to tell this story each year at our Passover Seder because we know that if God had not freed us, we would all still be slaves. We recognize that the more we learn and talk about it, the more we can see the suffering of others and feel called to make sure that all enslaved people are freed, even today.
We continue to tell the story of the Exodus. We turn to the 10 plagues, those 10 acts of God that pushed Pharaoh, really not till the 10th, but pushed Pharaoh closer, ultimately, to the point of redeeming our people from letting them go from Egypt. So I invite you to take your Kiddush cup. There's a tradition of using a spoon or a finger and lessening the wine in your cup by taking out a fingertip or a spoon, a drop of wine for each of the 10 plagues to lessen the sweetness in our cups as we celebrate the holiday. Turn to the list of the 10 plagues. I invite you to repeat them after me. Dam, blood. Svardea, frogs. Kinim, lice. Arov, insects. Dever, animal disease. Shechin, boils. Barad, hail. Arbe, locusts. Choshech, darkness. Makat bechorot, death of the firstborn. As we recall the traditional plagues, we recall too those that we don't even have to recall, the plagues in the world in which we live. And I invite you, as you speak with a friend or a relative or more than one friend or relative this Pesach evening, to recall the plagues in our world, the challenges that divide so many and cause such challenge in our lives, that take lives, and to converse together about how you may make a difference in even the smallest ways to reduce the plagues that are active in our lives today. Indeed, we recall the challenges, we recall the hardships, we recall the plagues, and we turn to gratitude. A most favorite part of our Seder for so many of us is Dayenu. I remember the first time I played it on guitar. I think I was about 9 years old at the Seder, and hopefully my guitar was tuned. I'm not sure I remember that one. And we sing Dayenu. It would have been enough. Dai is enough. Ayenu for us. And many of you have shared with us your Dayenu moments of the last year. And so the traditional Dayenu, which we'll sing in a little bit, those that recall the Exodus from Egypt, a movement toward the promised land. Some of us grew up singing all different numbers of verses. We'll come to that singing of Dayenu, that Raka song. But first I invite you to hear the Dayenu created from the words of you, our North Shore Congregation Israel community. Indeed, that catchy melody, while a highlight of our Seder, belies a deeper message. From slavery in Egypt to the building of the temple, each verse says it would have been enough if just this had happened. And so I share with you your words, the words of our community when we experience it was enough. Indeed, even in times of scarcity, in times of challenge, in times of aloneness, we choose to see the good and express gratitude. Please know that while I read this now, and you may want to come back to it, it is available on our website, and you can turn to it throughout Passover holiday. If only we had figured out that our Zoom Seder was in fact fully real, not virtual. Dayenu. If only we had heard the voice of a friend or seen their face through the glass. Dayenu. If only we had found a new way to celebrate a birthday. Dayenu. If only we had figured out how to do our job in an entirely new way. Dayenu. If only we had gathered for Shiva online, apart but still together across the miles. Dayenu. If only we had food in our pantry to get us through that day, that week. Dayenu. If only we were able to hear our children making music throughout the house while in lockdown. Dayenu. If only we had watched seeds sprout into plants. Dayenu. If only we had harvested those plants into food. Dayenu. If only we had quarantined for 2 weeks to hold that marvelous miracle in our arms for the first time. Dayenu. If only we had watched our child playing outside with our grandchildren. Dayenu. If only we had baked challah for the first time. Dayenu. If only we had heard the shofar in person in the temple parking lot. Dayenu. If only our grandparents got vaccinated. Dayenu. If only we had received our first COVID vaccination. Dayenu. If only we had seen our weary face in the mirror, but then looked down at our infant smile. Dayenu. If only we were able to stand alone at the beach. Dayenu. If only we reset our expectations about what is enough and found ourselves content and joyful about the simple things. Dayenu. As we reflect on life since last Passover, a very long year marked by devastating loss and as well by unanticipated gain and growth, the lesson becomes clear. Awareness of our incremental progress and gratitude for even the smallest of miracles propels us forward. It is possible that the promised land is not some unattainable place, but rather the space of promise that exists wherever we find ourselves, so long as we choose to see it that way. Dayenu.
Join with me in singing Dayenu. Ilo hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et ha-Shabbat. Natan lanu et ha-Shabbat. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et ha-Torah. Natan lanu et ha-Torah. Dayenu, 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 die, dayenu, die, dayenu, die, dayenu, dayenu, dayenu.
It was very somber for Diane Buchanan Goldstein, very thoughtful. I think after the year we've just had, a thoughtful as opposed to a raucous Diane who is just so in order. We are all familiar with Elijah's cup, and we will turn to Eliyahu at the end of our Seder. But we turn now to Miriam's cup. And Miriam's cup is, for some of us, a special cup, or it might be a regular Kiddush cup or glass that has, you can't really see in this, but has water in it. Our tradition says that by the merit of Miriam, our ancestors traveled through the wilderness with a well of water following them and sustaining them. Miriam, of course, being Moses and Aaron's sister who saved Moses. As our ancestors made their way from Egypt to the promised land, a special well accompanied them. This was a gift from God to reward Miriam for her goodness. The waters were miraculous and life-giving. The waters of Miriam's well had healing powers and gave strength to the community making their way through the wilderness. We are blessed with new beginnings. As the Israelites escaped bondage, they embarked on a new life. This water refreshes. Jews survived despite persecution. Our people are strong. Water sustains. May our thirst for equality and involvement in Jewish life be satiated. Water quenches. Our faith keeps us strong and brings meaning to our lives. Water nourishes. Passover reminds us of the coming of spring. Water renews. For these gifts, we honor Miriam with Kos Miriam, the cup of Miriam, on our Seder tables this evening. Everything, I feel, as we come to Seder this year, everything has its meaning and its new meaning. And that is, frankly, exactly what we're supposed to do at Seder. We are commanded in every age and generation to see ourselves as if we came out of Egypt. We are to see ourselves as if we personally have left Egypt. As it is said, make clear to your child on that day, this is because of what Adonai did for me when I myself went forth from Egypt. Indeed, we think about that. We are not physically in Egypt, but what is it for us? As we turn to our symbols, as we turn to our practice, those age-old ones and the new ones, what is their meaning for us in our time, for new freedoms, for new challenges? Each year, as we turn to the symbols of our Seder, we turn to new meaning and see ourselves as if we ourselves got out of Egypt. We turn to the second cup of wine.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
So we're almost there. We're almost at that point where we get to enjoy our meals, whether you're enjoying it in your homes or perhaps you're with someone else, or maybe you're on a Zoom Seder as well. We know that our Rabbi Gamliel, I'm looking at Rabbi Geffen, enjoying her parsley. We know that Rabbi Gamliel said that anyone who hasn't discussed the following three items hasn't fulfilled their Passover obligation. And so I look to my Seder plate here. We look to Pesach, our shank bone. In our family, my wife's family puts lamb in their meat sauce. And so what we do is we take the bone out of the sauce and we use it and roast it for our Passover celebration each year. We also have matzah and maror, those bitter herbs. I've got a prepared horseradish dip. The shank bone reminds us of that paschal offering that was brought to the temple in ancient days. It's also a reference to in Torah. It says that God helped the people free from Egypt with an outstretched arm, Zeruah. And so for me, it's a reminder of God's power in my life and my connection to God and to a higher power. You remember the plight of the fleeing Israelites. They threw their bread on their back and it baked that way, and we still enjoy this matzah connecting us throughout the generations and the miles on this holiday observance. And maror, reminding us of the bitterness of slavery. What's neat about Passover is that the Seder plate and all of these rituals and even the Haggadah developed over time, building and building and building, and each generation got to offer new symbols and new experiences in this development of Seder. And so what we're going to ask you is, what is it in the year 2021 that you have on your modern day Seder plate? What are those items that you would include this year that perhaps you didn't last? If you're joining us on Facebook, we'd invite you to write those items or describe what you're seeing and what you're experiencing in our chat. The most creative ideas win the award, of course. On my Seder table growing up, and every year, we include an orange. The orange is attributed to Professor Susanna Heschel. She was looking for a way to represent the most marginalized in our community, to represent and lift up the voices, as she saw it, of the LGBTQ community. And as the story goes, she was teaching in Florida, and some man stood up and challenged her ideas and said that orange belongs on a Seder plate like a woman belongs on a bima. Every year I include that orange on my plate to remember, to acknowledge, and to honor the powerful and strong women in my life, those who have helped teach me and nurture me and raise me to who I am, both as a human, as a professional, as a rabbi. This year, I include a mask, both to remember the people who wore the mask before I did, our medical professionals, our doctors, our nurses, our hospital workers, and healthcare workers of all kinds, who this year sustained us and kept many of us, and I think about my own experience, safe, and risked their lives for the sake of our society, and me and my family. So I thank them too. And of course, it was an experience that way. Also on my Seder plate each year, I include fair trade coffee and chocolate. My favorite food items, just like Rabbi Geffen includes the broccoli, I do coffee and chocolate, but fair trade, in that it's a reminder that the money that I spend, the places that I support, means something, right? And I support causes and lift up issues with the money I spend, with the efforts, and with the resources that I invest. And so, again, if you have creative, new, modern Seder items, go ahead and write in our chat and share that with us. Okay, it's time to eat. I invite you to lift up a piece of matzah. This, for me, it's got a decoration on it this year. We are going to offer hamotzi. This is a two-part blessing. Wait to eat until the second blessing. Let's say this together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav vitzivanu al achilat matzah. Yum. Our sage Hillel taught us that if you combine the bitter herbs, the maror, with the sweet charoset, the apple and nuts mixture that we have on our Seder plate, it's much sweeter. It's also a reference to something that Rabbi Green shared before, that we can hold both the bitterness of slavery and the sweetness of freedom on that same bite. So I'll invite you to make your Hillel sandwich, and we'll say the blessing for maror, eating the bitter herbs. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav vitzivanu al achilat maror. Amen. It's time to eat. So for some of you, If it's right for your group, for your practice, go ahead and pause us right here. Come back to the Seder later after you've enjoyed your meal. For others, we're going to continue with our Seder. We'd invite you to stay with us through the end, and perhaps you'll enjoy your meal after we're all done with that final cup, the fourth cup, later in our Seder. One of my favorite experiences growing up was to search for the afikomen, right? To search for that second half of the broken matzah that Rabbi Geffen broke in the beginning of our Seder experience. I learned this incredible custom of the Mizrahi Jewish community, Jews of the Middle East, that when they break the matzah, that middle piece, they pass the larger piece, what becomes the afikomen later on. And one at a time, each person around the Seder table places the matzah on their shoulder. Of course, referring back to as the Israelites left Egypt, they had the bread on their backs, it turns into matzah. But it's a reminder that each of us should see ourselves in that place of hardship, that each of us understand brokenness, we understand bondage, we understand that constriction in different ways, and we can each relate in some way. And so perhaps there's a sharing. And then, of course, that piece is hidden and it's enjoyed as the afikomen, as the sweet dessert at the end of the meal. Rabbi Yael Levi offers a poem, a reflection, a way of framing that experience of moving from that piece that represents that bondage of slavery to becoming the dessert that we enjoy. And she offers this prayer: may our eyes be open to each other's pain. May our ears be open to each other's cries. May we live with greater awareness. May we practice greater forgiveness. And may we go as free people, able to respond to ourselves and each other with compassion, with wonderment, appreciation, and love. You can enjoy your afikomen. Of course, everyone's got to take a little bit of a bite or a nibble. We can't end our Seder without enjoying dessert. We also turn now back to the third cup. We'll invite Cantor Goldstein to lead us in that blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
So while we drink 4 cups of wine, there is a 5th cup on our table, Kos Eliyahu. This Kos Eliyahu happens to be a very special cup given me by a bride and groom, I think from Kenya, actually, handmade, but makes me think of Jews all across the globe. And Eliyahu, we're told, will be the forerunner of the Messiah. And each year we opened the door and we look. Some families, there are jokers who go to the door, ring the doorbell. One year, somebody left a note in my house. I just read a short story with a number of people in our community in which Elijah comes to the door and stays for a week and they can't get him to leave. Somehow I don't think that is the epitome of Elijah. Elijah in our tradition symbolizes the Messiah. Elijah represents hope and potential. Elijah allows us to look to a better time. And though we may not think of it this way, Elijah speaks to our partnership in the repair of the world. We get up, we open the door, we sing to invite him in. We are not passive in that partnership. Throughout the year, we do the difficult work of making our world better. We do not just sit around and wait for Elijah to appear. So we turn to Kos Eliyahu, we turn to Elijah's cup, the cup that is generally undrunk, unless you have an uncle as mine was, who was wont to accidentally pick it up and drink it. We hold Elijah on the table, and sometimes we even fill it when we're together with wine from our own glasses to symbolize that we together have the redemptive power to make our world better and that we must work together to do so. So we lift Elijah's cup, we replace it, and we turn to open the door for Elijah the prophet, with the hopes, with the prayers, with the partnership that we bring to the possibility of him coming this year to our Seders.
And we come towards the conclusion of our Seder, and which Seder could be complete without singing the Passover melody, the melody that is unique to Passover, and that is da 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 da. So we're going to sing Adirhu, one verse in Hebrew, one verse in English, because who knows? I don't know which tradition you had, but with my family, I tried to get through at least one verse of each because they wouldn't let me do anything else. But here we go. Adirhu, Adirhu, Yivneveto Becharov, Bimhera, Bimhera, Biameinu Bekarov, El B'nei, El b'nei, b'nei vetra bekarov, God of might, God of right, we would bow before you. Sing your praise in these days, celebrate your glory. When we hear, year by year, freedom's wondrous story. And we come to the fourth cup of wine now that we are very close to concluding our Seder. And the fourth cup of wine hopefully reminds us that being free is not enough. It is a call to continue the work. And it is also the hope that Elijah's cup reminds us of as well, that the hope of the possibility of a full redemption, not just the redemption at the shores of the sea, the redemption that Passover is a description of, but a redemption that is complete, where we all live in a continual Shabbat, a continual moment of peace, of reflection, and a connection to God. And so we join in our fourth cup of wine together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen.
We bring our Seder to a close. We want to thank you for joining us. Thanks for celebrating Passover with us. It means a lot that we get to Zoom into your Seder tables and for us to invite you into ours. And as it's traditional, we end with this prayer. Next year in Jerusalem, Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim. Next year in the Promised Land. Or perhaps next year in the space of promise for each of us. Next year, may we all be free. Chag Pesach Sameach. Happy Passover.